This is WCN, the Whole Care Network. You talk, we listen. Content presented on the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent views of the Whole Care Network. Always consult your physician for medical and fitness advice, and always consult your attorney for legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to Island Treasures, a place for caregivers to hear encouragement from other caregivers who, by sharing their experiences, offer helpful information and resources for your caregiving journey. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, Cabin Teely Contractors in the Comox Valley, where we care too. And I am your host and certified caregiving consultant, Alison Van Schie of Alongside Caregiver Consulting, from beautiful Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. My guest today is a former intensive care nurse and caregiver for her parents, and then her mother-in-law. And now she is a published writer, sharing many stories and messages of hope. Today we will focus on a story of a misdiagnosis and how it took strong advocacy and commitment on her part to obtain the testing required for her mother to discover that she had Normal Pressure Hydrocephalus, or N.P.H. Receiving this diagnosis allowed for the right treatment plan and a remarkable improvement in her mom's symptoms. Now, she doesn't want to give false hope, but this is a story worth telling about the importance of strong advocacy. So join me now as I welcome Tracy Crump to tell us more. Welcome, Tracy. Thanks for joining me today on the Island Treasures podcast for caregivers.
Thank you, Allison. I'm looking forward to our talk together.
Me too. I think you've got a lot to share. So where would you like to start?
Well, let me just kind of go back and give you our history. My parents lived just a mile from me, which was a huge blessing as things developed, because my dad had been in poor health for many years, but they were rocking along. My mom, she was in good health. He was still able to drive and do some things, and she kind of looked over him, cared for him. But then she started to go downhill. We noticed some memory problems. We took her to a gerontologist, and he said that she had just mild cognitive disorder, which can develop into something more severe or not. You never know. So we just kind of watched her for a while. But it seemed like after a couple of years, one summer, she just started going downhill very quickly. And she also developed some odd motor symptoms, which didn't really go along with just the memory problems. She would lean over to the side, or she would lean forward and not realize she was doing it. I would say, "Is your stomach hurting?" And she'd say, "No." And she didn't even know she was doing it. Mm. She would walk on the side of her foot, and just some other odd things that just didn't make sense. So we started going to the doctor, and one doctor after another. The first doctor, her primary care physician, did an MRA, which is a more involved MRI.
Okay.
With contrast, and they didn't see anything unusual. A little bit of brain atrophy, which is normal with older age. So he suggested we might go to a hearing and balance doctor. He said, or an ENT. He said she was kind of off balance, said she was dizzy sometimes. So we went there. They said, "Oh yeah, we think this is an inner ear problem." So she did the exercises they prescribed. Didn't do any good. We went to a couple of other doctors. Finally, I said, "I think we need to go to a neurologist." And so he sent us to one. And the neurologist did just a cursory mental test on her and said she's got dementia. Mm-hmm. I mean, nothing involved, just said that right in front of her. And by this time, she was really regressing a lot. And so I said, "Well, what about her other motor symptoms?" He said, "No, she's got dementia." Well, all this time we were going to doctors. I have to tell you this, Allison. because this was so significant, so important to me, that all this time we were going to doctors, I wasn't sleeping. I mean, it was a couple of months, and I couldn't sleep. I'd stay awake all night. I'd think, what's wrong? I used to be a nurse. I worked as an ICU nurse years before. And I thought, as a nurse, I should be able to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
We're the caregivers. We should be able to figure this out. And so I just went through one thing after another in my mind. And I think this is ridiculous. I'm just not getting rest. I got to go to sleep. And I would pray. I would just say, Lord, just please give me the answer. Just show me what we need to do. What doctor we need to go to. Just please show me. And over, I would pray that, I would just lay it at his feet. And then I would immediately think, oh, you know what? We haven't checked that. And I would just take it back. And it just went in there. It was just a constant cycle. And I was just exhausted.
Of course.
Well, finally, one night I said, Lord, I think I'm just playing God here. I don't know what to do. And I need to just quit. I just need to let you handle it. I'm just done. I can't think of anything else to do. And that night, as I was kind of drifting off to sleep, suddenly a memory returned of a friend whose dad had the same kind of symptoms. He had started falling, and she had started falling, and just some of the other symptoms she had. And I thought, what was it his dad had? And suddenly it came back to me, 3 words that will probably make no sense to your audience, but it was normal pressure hydrocephalus. And I thought, And the next morning when I got up, I looked it up. She had all the cardinal signs of it. And so we went back to the neurologist, and I said, could she have normal pressure hydrocephalus? He looked at me in the eye and he said, no.
Oh.
And I said, why not? He said, because her MRI didn't show it. Well, fortunately, I had done my homework. And I said, well, isn't it true that the MRI is not always definitive? Isn't there a specialized test you can do? Well, he kind of backed off and he said, yes, yeah, there is, if you really want to do that, but you would have to go to a neurosurgeon. I said, okay. So he sent us to a neurosurgeon, and I told him all that was going on. And I said, do you think she could have normal pressure hydrocephalus? He said, no.
Oh, no.
I said, I thought, deja vu, we have been here before. And so I said, why not? And he said, the MRI doesn't show it. And he said, and her walking just doesn't look like somebody with N.P.H. And I said, but isn't it true that the MRI doesn't always show it? And I said, isn't there another test? And he said, yes. He said, we could do that if you really want to do it. It kind of made me feel like a bad daughter for suggesting it. It was not a pleasant test. It involved a lumbar puncture, a spinal tap, and coming back 3 days in a row for CAT scans. And so he said, if you really, I said, well, let me talk to my dad. Let me see what he wants to do. Well, this was about time for the holidays. And so, nothing happens around that time of year. And by the time we got to the point where we decided, yes, we're going to do this test, she had a severe fall, and ended up in the hospital. And her doctor thought, well, maybe she could benefit from rehab. So she ended up in a skilled nursing facility. And so it just so happened, and I don't believe this just so happened. I don't think it's coincidence, but the doctor who oversaw that facility was making rounds that day. She normally didn't make rounds, but every 3 weeks or so. And so she stopped by our room and asked me about my mom. And I just dumped on her for 20 minutes. And I told her everything we were going through. And she said, the learning curve on normal pressure hydrocephalus is going straight up. She said, we're just now learning about it. Now, this was about 12 years ago. And she said there have even been programs on TV about it, like some of these news programs. She said, you only have one mom. She said, I would do everything I could to find out if that is a possibility. So that was just a confirmation to me. I wanted to cry that day, because I thought, this is what I needed to move forward. So we did have the test done. She did have normal pressure hydrocephalus.
Wow.
She had a shunt inserted, and she made an amazing turnaround. Now, she had gotten to the point, I didn't even tell you this, that she got to the point where she could no longer walk. She could barely answer 1 or 2 words to questions. So no real conversation, no complete sentences. And she had no memory. I mean, her memory was nil. And within 3 days, She was making complete sentences. She remembered something an aide had said, 10 minutes before she walked out of the room. She never fully regained her mobility. She went through some very intensive rehab after that. So she was never again able to care for herself or my dad after that. But she did make an amazing turnaround. We had her for 3 more years, and we had some ups and downs. It's not easy. N.P.H is not an easy condition to live with. But she did make an amazing turnaround. And I'm so grateful, because I do feel like that God gave me the answer to her problem that night. Mm-hmm. And one point I want to make to your listeners is that we need to advocate for our loved ones. When they can't advocate for themselves, they need somebody. I honestly think she would have died within just probably a couple of months. She had declined that much.
So you really persevered with your advocacy, because you had the doctor, the neurosurgeon. You were just hitting brick walls. They didn't entertain that it could possibly be normal pressure hydrocephalus.
That's it.
So N.P.H.
That's right.
And then, because of your perseverance and because of circumstances, you were with this doctor who validated your concerns and actually agreed with you testing your mom and getting your mom tested. And that revealed the answer for you. And you did your homework. You said, that's a takeaway as well, Tracy. You did your homework, you persevered, and you advocated with love for your mom. What an outcome.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have to be a nurse, a medical worker to do some research. You're going to find some information out there that's not correct. So you have to be careful where you go. Go to some of the larger sites like the Mayo Clinic sites and things like that. But you can find information. Doctors are so busy. I do not fault doctors for not having the time to sit down and research every patient that comes to see them. They can't do that. They have a lot of knowledge, but they don't know everything. They can't know everything. There's so much medical information out there. They can't know it all. So when we do some of our own research, that actually helps them. Mm-hmm. And of course, like you say, advocating for your loved one, it's just so important.
And Tracy, you raise a really important point. Go to credible sites. Like you said, the Mayo Clinic. There are some really good sites, some medical information sites, but there are also sites that may not be credible. So just remember that when we're searching Dr. Google.
Right, right.
But there are definitely bona fide, credible sites that you can go to.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and you don't have to have a medical degree to understand the information they're giving you. So anyway, that's pretty much the story about my mom. Mm-hmm. Let me just explain what normal pressure hydrocephalus is too, sure, for your listeners, because she was basically misdiagnosed with Alzheimer's. I don't remember if he said Alzheimer's or dementia, but either way, she did have, now we learned later on, we had a different neurosurgeon later on who was just excellent. And he looked at her scans and said she actually had 4 different things going on. In addition to the normal pressure hydrocephalus, she had some mild vascular dementia going on, some kind of like little infarcts, little mini strokes. Yeah. She had something going on in her cerebellum, which controls the balance and your walking and your mobility. So that was probably a big cause of her other problems. And I can't remember right now what the 4th thing was, but he did identify 4 different things. But the normal pressure hydrocephalus, and I have known several people since then who have had this. One was our neighbor up the street. One was a good friend's husband, just recently had a shunt inserted. What it happens is, you've probably heard of babies born with hydrocephalus, where they call it water on the brain.
Right.
And their heads, of course, are still soft. Their skulls are not fused yet. And so their heads actually swell with it. And what happens is the cerebral spinal fluid that flows around the brain and the spinal cord is not reabsorbed as it should be, or it's blocked in some way. And this can happen, they found, as people get older, and they don't realize it, and it's not reabsorbed. So it's building up pressure in the brain. Well, our skulls are hard and fused, and so they can't swell with that. And it's just pressing against the brain itself. And so that's what causes the symptoms. Mm. And if it's not treated, then it will eventually kill the person. So the shunt is inserted to drain the excess fluid actually into the abdominal cavity. And it makes just an amazing difference.
Wow.
So
That's quite a long shunt.
it is. But it was a very effective treatment.
Yeah.
So my mom did fairly well. She did pass away. But then my dad, the last 3 months that she was alive, went into the hospital with appendicitis. And he developed some complications. He had like I said, he had quite a few health problems anyway. And he ended up in kidney failure on dialysis and was going back and forth between rehab and the hospital for about 3 months. And the whole time I was helping my mom at home and trying to stay up at the hospital with him. Very, very difficult time. And at one point they were both in the hospital at the same time. I was going from one floor to the other to see about them.
Fortunately, they were in the same hospital.
Exactly. That's right. And I've known people who have had loved ones in different hospitals. So, but anyway, he came home the day after her funeral. And he came home on dialysis, 24/7 oxygen, wound care, home health, rehab. So I had no time to grieve my mom at that time. I had to jump right back into caregiving and took care of him then.
And he wasn't even able to go to her funeral then, Tracy?
We actually were able to get him from rehab to the funeral and had to take him back. But yes, he did. He did. So, but it
yes, that would have stretched you in every way possible. And then the grief, were you able to grieve eventually?
Not for a while, but yes. Actually, he stayed home for another year. He was able, this was just a miraculous thing, very unusual that people come off dialysis. They don't usually come off dialysis, but about 4 months later, he came off dialysis. And we kept him at home. We had private caregivers. Once my mom came home from rehab, we had private caregivers. So I was able to keep them in their own home for that whole time. And then we continued with the caregivers for the next year while he was home. But we finally made the decision to move him to assisted living. Our main caregiver, the one who'd been with us the whole time, her husband was developing a lot of problems. And so she had about decided she was going to have to quit working with us. And so everything it was just the right time. Right. They had an opening at the assisted living center that we chose. And, it just came open all of a sudden. Usually they have a long waiting list. Just everything fell into place. And so he was okay with it. And so we moved him into assisted living. And then he was there for another 2 years before he passed away. Oh. So anyway, it was a big relief, big weight off my shoulders when he moved into assisted living, but you're still a caregiver.
Yes. You are.
Oh, yes. Anytime there's a problem, anytime, he had to go to the hospital or to a doctor's appointment, got up in the middle of the night when he fell, had to take him to the emergency room, you're still on call 24/7.
And you're still advocating and you're still the eyes, you're still seeing, making sure things are going okay for him, that his care is kept up. Like, not all assisted living homes are the best.
Yeah. Yeah. We were very blessed to have a really good one and had good relationship with the nurse, our nurses, more than one there, and the staff. So it was a good situation. But like you say, there's still little things that you have to watch out for and take care of.
Definitely. Yeah. So that was your intense period of caregiving. So several years.
Yeah, that was one intense period of caregiving.
Oh, no, there's more.
Yeah, there's more. So we had about a year after my dad passed away before we moved my mother-in-law in with us.
Oh, okay.
She was 96 years old at the time, had lived on her own all that time, taking care of herself, had done well, but she was just starting to decline. And we could just see the signs that it was just time. And she wasn't happy about it. Now she had been widowed early in her marriage and had never remarried, raised my husband. He was her only child. Well, she actually was pregnant at the time and lost her baby. So he was her only one. and had just lived on her own all that time. She was not anxious to move in with him. That was not on her bucket list.
Yeah.
But and of course, after just all that caregiving with my mom and dad, it was, it wasn't exactly the thing I wanted to do either, but it was the right thing to do. And so we moved her in with us, and she did well. She was on a walker, but she, was mobile and took care of herself in a lot of ways. I mean, I still had to do a lot of things for her, and of course the cooking and everything else. And so we went on for about 4 years. And of course, in the middle of that was the pandemic. We had COVID, and we strictly isolated for her. We didn't go anywhere.
Okay.
I mean, we missed grandchildren's birthdays and everything just to be sure that we did not risk her being infected. So we went along okay. In April of 2021, she turned 100. And we didn't get to have the big birthday party we had always thought we would because of COVID, but she still had a great time. Our grandkids came by, and we did get with them, for a little while. And then her nieces that she hadn't seen in a while, we had a little patio party with them. I heard her telling somebody on the phone, she said, I've just been celebrating all month long. I've had a birthday party. Then 10 days after her birthday, she had a heart attack. She survived it. We brought her back home. She was getting weaker and weaker, and so we've put her on hospice.
Okay.
And I honestly did not think she would last another week after that. She was just degenerating, declining so quickly. She lived 3.5 more months. We were blessed to have her, but they were very, very hard months.
Okay.
It was very much like having a baby in the house again. We had to get up with her in the middle of the night. As she declined, we had to, hand feed her, all that kind of thing. And we weren't 20-something parents anymore. We were 60-somethings. So it was very hard, very intense, very emotional. It was a long summer, is all I can say. But she was ready to go home. Sometimes you think, why did God let someone linger like that? She wasn't in terrible pain. There were times she still had some chest pain, and she had trouble, even got to the point where she had trouble even turning in bed. We had to, turn her and do things like that for her. But she was so full of joy. She was just a joyous person. And everyone who came into the house heard about Jesus from her. She even preached to the hospice chaplain who came. She was so funny. And she would just tell him, she said, just please pray that God will let me complete my mission. And, for a while we would think, you're 100 years old. What mission? What have you not done?
Mission?
Yeah. We finally figured out it was her telling everyone about Jesus, about her faith in God. And so anyway, it was just a very enlightening thing to realize that. And she finally passed away in her sleep, which is what she wanted to do. She had told us that's what she wanted to do. And so that was, like I say, very emotional, but it was another intense caregiving situation.
Yeah. Well, because of her heart attack, it was full on caregiving again.
It was.
That's your mission.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Oh.
Yeah. So those are very intense examples of caregiving and part of what makes you who you are now. And so you have the nursing background, so you were well prepared.
I was.
So tell us what you do now, how this has evolved into what you do now.
Well, during this time, I had become a writer. Now, that's not something I had ever planned to do, but I had started writing actually before my mom even began going downhill. And I think my writing career was just kind of taking off when she started having problems.
So what kind of writing were you doing at that point?
I was actually publishing. I started publishing in 2005, and I was publishing articles and devotionals and also stories. I've published quite a few stories in Chicken Soup for the Soul books and other anthologies. And so that had just kind of started taking off. I remember a friend saying she had gone to a conference and she said, every sample magazine they had here had something by you in it. She said,
Oh, wonderful. That's exciting.
Your name.
That's fun.
So it was fun. But of course, when my mom started having problems, I had to kind of put the brakes on. I didn't stop completely. And in fact, I remember one time a friend and I had decided that we were going to start doing workshops on writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul. And so I remember being up at the hospital with my mom and my laptop in my lap and planning we were started doing webinars even on it. And so I was planning a webinar on that. And so you still, you can continue doing some of the things that you love, and you have to kind of maintain your sanity.
During caregiving. Yeah.
During caregiving. Right. So I was doing some of that. It just kind of took slow spells at times, depending on what was going on with my parents or my mother-in-law. But I continued on. And since then, I've started a blog for caregivers, which I'd always said I would never blog. I'm such a perfectionist at writing that it takes me forever sometimes to write even a short piece. So I'd said I wasn't going to do that. But a friend said, you really need to blog on caregiving. And so that's what I started. And I've had some guest bloggers that have really contributed some wonderful pieces. Also, I am in the midst of planning a devotional book for caregivers, and it's going to be written with two co-writers. One, she lives in Kentucky. I'm in Mississippi. She lives in Kentucky. She has cared for her husband since 2004, when he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And then he, a couple of years later, had a major stroke and heart attack. And so she has been caregiver and is still caregiver for him. She has just a wonderful testimony and a lot of wonderful experiences that I believe will help other people. And then the other co-writer is Craig von Busek. And so he works for Focus on the Family, which is a huge ministry. And he's a prolific writer. He's authored many books. I met him at a conference one year, actually a couple of different conferences. And we were both caregiving for our parents at the time. And so we kind of bonded over that. He was more like a long distance caregiver. Yeah. And he just jokingly said, we ought to write a devotional book for caregivers. So that was several years ago. And I called him on it.
The seed was sown. And isn't that the way it is? The amazing common bond of caregiving. And you could be sitting with a stranger and that comes up in conversation and you're bonded.
Yes.
Even though the circumstances might be completely different, there's so many similar emotions and some insights that can come up out of sharing that you're both caregiving.
That's right. And I've heard so many people say, people who haven't done it just don't understand. And it's like a sisterhood and brotherhood. Yeah. It is.
And you did mention that Craig was a long distance caregiver, and that is still caregiving, 100%.
It is because you're still involved. And there's so many aspects to caregiving. I mean, because financial, you can help with finances. There are just so many things involved in caregiving when you have to basically kind of take over someone else's life, in order to help them. Yeah. And I remember too, Craig saying he used to also be a hospital chaplain. And he said the one thing that he heard from caregivers was, I am so tired. Oh. I'm just exhausted. And I remember saying that one time to our pastor. He was asking when we were caring for my mother-in-law while she was on hospice. He said, how are you and your husband doing? And I said, we're just so tired. And he said, so tired, like he thought I was going to say some really spiritual thing,
No, it's a body need. You need sleep, you need rest, you need rejuvenation.
Yeah. So yeah. It's hard to understand unless you've really been through it. It is. Yeah. But I'm excited about this upcoming book. We're just now getting the book proposal together. And nothing happens quickly in the publishing industry. So it may be a couple of years or more before this comes about. But I'm really excited about it. I'm really hopeful that this will be helpful and encouraging to other caregivers. We want it to be practical as well as spiritual. So we want it to uplift them in their spiritual walk, and also help them through some things with practical tips for caregiving.
Yeah, that's what caregivers need. They need to know they're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
they
right.
need to know there's hope.
That's right. Exactly.
Tracy, I have to share with you that I tried to write a blog one time, and it ended up being more like, I called it a blummery. So it was a blog and a summary combined. Because I'm so chronological, and yeah, so blummeries are my thing.
Well, I'm sure somebody could glean a lot from it, though, still.
Well, we'll see. I'm hoping to be a guest contributor to your blog, and I'm hoping you'll work some editorial magic on it to make it not a blummery, but to make it a blog.
Oh, I'm sure it'll be wonderful, but I would be happy to. I think that's great. I'm looking forward to it. I think it will be wonderful.
Well, thank you. That's fun. So you are a writer and a former caregiver, and you do workshops. You're still doing workshops for the Chicken Soup for the Soul contributions?
We are. We had one scheduled right about the time that COVID hit, so we had to cancel that one, but I'm scheduled to do a 3-hour workshop in March for the Mid-South Christian Writers Conference. We love to do the in-person workshops because we just connect. The attendees love it, and we do so many hands-on things. It's hard. Something that would be hard to do like by Zoom or some other remote way of doing it. People really get a lot out of it. I know one attendee in the last one that we did said, we did a 4.5-hour workshop at the time. I have a co-presenter who does it with me. And this attendee said, she said, when I looked at this, I didn't know how you were going to fill 4.5 hours.
Oh,
but I haven't looked at my watch one time. She said, this has been great. It's a lot of fun. So
what a compliment.
Yeah.
That's an affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
So you like doing the in-person, the live workshops because you can, no pun intended, read your audience.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. That feedback is so helpful.
I like doing in person as well. With caregivers, using the phone to connect with them is not the same as even seeing them over Zoom. And it's so powerful to be able to read the whole body, know exactly what they're conveying. You can read so much when you're in person.
Mm-hmm. That's important. It is. And caregivers need that support so badly. They feel so isolated. We were isolated with COVID, but we did that purposely and for a reason. Yeah. But caregivers themselves are just isolated so many times, staying, for one thing, trying to keep from bringing any infections back to their home, to their loved ones. But when they live with the person they're caregiving for, they are on call, as I said, 24/7. And so they don't sometimes have a life. And it's very important to get that kind of support, and just even a touch on the shoulder. People who aren't caregiving can provide support in so many ways by just saying, is there something you need? Is there something I can do for you? One of the posts that's coming up that a guest writer wrote for me, she talks about needing that, and somebody coming into her home and saying, what little piece of your life can I help you put back in order? Mm-hmm. So instead of just saying, what can I do for you? What do you need? Just something just popped immediately into her mind.
Yeah, specific. Yeah.
And that was just such a gift that woman gave to her.
Yeah. And you also said how you, as you were full on caregiving, you still took time for what you wanted to do because it was an outlet you needed to participate in. So you didn't lose who you were in caregiving. And so, yes, when you're feeling isolated, it is so important to have other outlets, if at all possible. So that person offering, what's one piece I can put back for you? That's lovely.
Mm-hmm. And we had some support too, even though, we didn't let a lot of people come into our home. But when my mother-in-law was on hospice and so ill, we just needed to get out. And so I had a friend, she works with a wildlife center, and she actually does wildlife programs on her own. Huh. She brought her little, not little, this was a huge rabbit, and a little guinea pig, and her service dog, not a service dog, but a dog that, goes to the hospitals and But anyway, she brought those and she sat with my mother-in-law while we went out and ate lunch. That's all we did. Went to a park and ate lunch. And so she sat with her. She held the bunny. They watched some old shows together that my mother-in-law enjoyed. So it was a really nice. And she said, I want to come back again. She said, your mother-in-law is amazing. She said, I just want to come back and talk to her again. She's had 100 years of experiences. And she said, I so enjoyed sitting with her and being with her. So that was just a blessing to us and a gift to us. And that's something that anybody can do, just for a couple of hours, just to give the caregiver a time away.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I've been tasked with, and I'm not sure how it's going to unfold, but it's to come up with kind of like a voluntary respite program. And I don't know what it looks like. I don't know how it's going to evolve, but it's just for that very same thing as what you just mentioned. It's to come and sit with the loved one so that the caregiver and people who are just feeling so drained can have some respite for a couple of hours. Just go for coffee, go for a walk, have a moment of refreshment.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I know that a lot of people would really appreciate that.
So now you've sown another seed. I'm going to have to find someone who's got bunnies and to come and sit with loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just have to figure it out. Like there's no real program. There's agencies that do it, but this would totally be voluntary and it would just be hopefully mutually beneficial for the person coming in. Like your friend said, like she just wanted to absorb all those 100 years of wisdom and stories and just feel it. Like just, yeah.
And you don't have to be, it's not like you're going to have to do any medical procedures or anything like that. Just sit and watch TV with them or sit and talk to them. Yeah. It doesn't have to be anything really involved.
Nope. That's what I'm hoping to. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Tracy, tell me a little bit more about the book that you already have published.
Okay. Well, there's some exciting things going on. It actually came out during my mother-in-law's time in hospice. It's called Health, Healing, and Wholeness, Devotions of Hope in the Midst of Illness. And the devotions are based on my caregiving and nursing experiences. And it's aimed to bring hope to people who are facing cancer or dealing with chronic illness, recovering from accidents, all kinds of situations. It's not any particular situation or illness. But the book got delayed. I got the contract right as COVID hit. And so, I had a little conversation with the Lord at the time, and I said, health, healing, and wholeness, pandemic, wouldn't this be the best time for this to come out?
In Tracy's world.
In my world, that's right. But he had something better planned. So I thought it would come out by Christmas of that year. No, it got delayed again. So it wasn't going to come out until June. Well, it was that April that she had her heart attack. And then we spent the whole month, of course, caring for her. So when it came out, I could do nothing. Anyone who's a writer knows that the launch day is a big deal, especially when it's your first book. And I could do nothing to help. But I did have a launch team in place. And the launch director said, you just stand down. We've got this. And so they took it to #1 top new release on the day that it launched.
Well, congratulations. That's huge.
Well, I think once again, that was just God's hand on it. That was his plan all along. Because as I say, when you can do nothing, you know that God has stepped in. So even then after that, we were still caring for her and I couldn't do a whole lot to help with it. But just recently, I have talked to a few business owners, Christian business owners, who want to sponsor the book to go into a cancer clinic here that's close to us. And they've sponsored a couple of cases. The publisher has a deal on it. He offers 40% discount with free shipping. And I don't even get free shipping. But if they want to order a case of 25 or more. And so it's going to go to a cancer clinic and be made available to the patients there, which has been my dream all along, is to get it in the hands of people who are facing these terrible illnesses who may feel like they are facing a hopeless situation, and to just show them that there is always hope. And then the next month, a couple who are both cancer survivors purchased a case that will go to a local ministry called DeSoto Hope Ministries. And they make up baskets for cancer patients who are going through chemo treatments. Then another business owner called me just a few days ago. She wants to purchase a case. I'm very excited about that. And it will also be to cancer patients or parents, actually, of young cancer patients. Anyway, that just to me is where God is using, I think, this book to bring hope to other people. And I'm just very excited about it.
I think you should be. I've got a couple of questions for you. One, could you tell me a little bit more about the launch team? I've never heard of a launch team before.
It's probably a fairly recent development, but you gather people who are willing to talk about your book, on social media, Facebook and Instagram, whatever, talk it up before it launches. And also they read a copy, and then we'll put reviews online, which are very important on Amazon to have a lot of reviews. My book has a 5-star review, 5-star with over 50 reviews. So it's very important to do that. And so that's what a launch team does. And then the launch director, she basically makes up the memes, the images that they can use. And so she makes it easy for everybody. And that's what they do. And
I had not heard of one of those,
Yeah.
so that's good. But then again, I am not an author and I don't plan to write any books.
You won't have to worry about it.
And my second question is, when they sponsor a case, are they gifting the books that they will be putting in the baskets for the families?
Yes.
So they're not charging
No,
them.
no. Right. No, it's a donation.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate that that they've kind of come on board and want to do this, and especially that they want to minister to cancer patients. And like I say, it's not just aimed at cancer patients. It can be anybody that's facing any kind of a health crisis, but they've been very, very willing to do this. So I hope to approach more people.
Well, it's word of mouth, and obviously on social media, it's getting blasted. So that's good. Back to Chicken Soup for the Soul. I wonder if I've read some of your stories. Which editions are you in for Chicken Soup for the Soul?
Well, the very first 2 that I published were in Chicken Soup for the Nurse's Soul book. It's number 2. They've had, I think, 4 different ones for nurses, but this was the second one. In fact, those 2 stories evolved into stories that I used in my book, my devotional book. So I rewrote them into devotions and used those because they were very powerful stories. And I've had them in just a variety of books. One was The Father and Son Soul. I had 2 stories in that. Had one for moms. One for inspiration for teachers. I was a homeschool teacher, but I was not a teacher. And so actually that was about my dad when he was in assisted living. The activities director there hooked some of the patients at the assisted living up with first grade classes.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
And they wrote letters back and forth. It was kind of like a pen pal thing. And he ended up going to their Valentine party. Didn't want to go. Didn't really want to go. He was cranky, didn't feel well, didn't want to go. It, I would say, changed his life. It changed his outlook. And he just couldn't say enough about them. He passed away a month after that. We didn't know at the time. And his little class cried for him. But later I was able to go, and I wrote that story. And I went back to that class and that teacher and read the story to them and talked to them. And it was just such a sweet, sweet time.
Oh my goodness, that's tearing me up, because when I worked in the nursing home, they would bring school classes in, and it would bring so much joy to the residents. And seriously, Tracy, that's really speaking to me. I love that. I'm going to have to track that story down, because I'm going to get a box of Kleenex and that story.
That's right. Exactly. It's in Inspiration for Teachers. That was the name of that book. But I also had some they had one, they had, I think, a couple of books, Living with Alzheimer's and Other Dementias.
I have that one.
You do? Okay. The first one, I had a story in that. And that actually opened some doors for me. I think when they put that out, it was to benefit the National Alzheimer's Association. So every state chapter, I think, was required to buy a certain number of the books, a case of the books, maybe, I don't know. And then they were asked to contact, if any of the writers lived in their state, to contact them. So the Mississippi chapter contacted me and asked me if I would come and talk to a meeting that they were having with some of their chapter leaders. And so I got to go and not only talk about that story involved my mom and her misdiagnosis and all that, the normal pressure hydrocephalus. So I got to go and kind of talk to them and kind of open their eyes to the fact that sometimes Alzheimer's is not Alzheimer's. It can be misdiagnosed. Not that I ever want to raise any false hopes with anyone, but I do want people to know that that is a possibility. And I also got to kind of witness to them about God speaking to me about that, what was wrong with my mom. And anyway, then later, the little marketing director there called me back and asked me if I wanted to go and talk to some facilities, some assisted living facilities, just about writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul. Down in Jackson, which is our state capital. So I got to do that. That was just a lot of fun to do. Stayed overnight there, and I got to meet, a lot of the residents there and talk to them. So that was a lot of fun. And that was one door that getting a story published in Chicken Soup for the Soul opened for me.
Oh, that sounds like it was a lot of fun. What a great opportunity.
Yeah, it was.
I too had a door open through a Chicken Soup for the Soul connection, and I'd read the Navigating Elder Care and Dementia edition, and a couple of the stories were written by an author named Brenda Leppington. And I reached out to Brenda and I asked her to read one of the stories on the podcast, and she did, in the episode with the same title as her story, Who Am I Hurting? So that too was a really neat connection, similar to all the doors that were opening for you, Tracy. It was just a nice connection. So thank you to Chicken Soup for the Soul for that and for what you do with your workshops. Very exciting. So Tracy, how can folks get a hold of you?
Well, they can go to my website. It's tracycrump.com, TRACY, Crump, CRUMP.com. And I have things on there about my book, about our workshops, also about editing that I do. So they can find pretty much everything on there. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn, Twitter, and started on Instagram a few months ago. So I'm not really proficient at that, but I do have some reels on there that pertain to caregiving. I call them caregiving tools. And I just highlight one little thing that we found that was helpful when we cared for either my parents or my mother-in-law. And they're just a variety of things. And so a lot of people seem to find those helpful, but they can find me on Instagram.
Well done for entering the Instagram world. So what tips or words of encouragement do you have for our listeners today, Tracy?
Well, I just think that you will never regret caring for a loved one. It's hard. It is the hardest job you'll ever do, but I don't think you'll ever regret it. It is many times tearful. It's exhausting. It can be frustrating. I feel for those who maybe didn't have a good relationship with their loved one to begin with. It's probably not going to get easier, but you will not regret caring for your loved one, because at some point they will be gone. And I think you'll be glad that you did. I do think too that you are meant to advocate for your loved one. It's not an easy job. It's not an easy job advocating for yourself. So it's really not easy to advocate for somebody else. But that's one way that you can help and make a difference in your loved one's life. So I just don't think you'll ever regret having taken on this big job. It is a big job, but I don't think you'll ever regret it.
Well, thank you for that. And there are resources, and you are a resource. Your website is a resource. Your writing is a resource. My website is a resource. There are resources out there for folks who are finding it intense when they're caregiving. And please just hear that you're not alone when you're caregiving.
Yes.
And I would like to ask you to share one personal tidbit about yourself, if you would be so willing.
Okay. Well, I've kind of alluded to this, I guess, before, but I never planned to be a writer. It was not on my radar, not something I ever enjoyed in school. In fact, I hated writing when I was at school. So it was just, it was something I felt that God led me to do, to write about some personal experiences that I thought could help other people. I ended up actually writing a book. It's never been published, but I went to a conference. I received a card in the mail advertising this conference. I'd never received anything about a writer's conference before. I still don't know why I got that card, but I thought, well, maybe this is what I need to do. I'll just hand this book off to a willing publisher and I'll be done with this writing stuff.
Never again.
Yeah, it's like, ha ha. So I ended up going there, meeting with some publishers, but I also met with a couple of magazine editors who were interested in the topic. And so within a few months, I had 2 articles published in national magazines. And I thought, oh, this is, and they paid me too.
Oh my goodness, well done.
This is kind of fun. So that's just kind of where everything started, but it's not something I ever planned to do, but you just never know where God is going to lead you. And you just have to walk that road and see what happens. And I love it now. I love writing. So
that's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that tidbit. Thank you for sharing this time with our listeners and with me. I've really, really enjoyed getting to know you better and hearing your story more in depth as well.
Thank you so much for having me, Allison.
My pleasure. As Tracy stressed, she does not wish to give false hope. But there are medical conditions to rule out before accepting a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia. And in her mom's case, the diagnosis of normal pressure hydrocephalus had not been ruled out. Tracy reminds us that caregiving is very hard, intensive, and emotional, and requires caregivers to be strong advocates. Noticing that her mom was experiencing odd symptoms that just didn't make sense, Tracy kept advocating, doing her homework, and praying to learn what questions to ask. She didn't give up. Along the way, she experienced self-doubt, and she also received validation that really helped when a doctor reminded her, "You only have one mother." And her perseverance paid off. Although her mom didn't fully recover, she did make an amazing turnaround. If you want to hear more from Tracy, you can visit her website, tracycrump.com. And while you're there, be sure to check out her blog, the one she never thought she would write. And heed Tracy's reminders to be strong advocates and do your homework. And don't forget to do what you love, even during caregiving. And if you're in the midst of your own caregiving journey and do need some supports, I invite you to tap into alongsidecaregiverconsulting.ca or Alongside Caregiver Consulting's Facebook page or Instagram account. If you'd like to share your story as a guest on the Island Treasures podcast, please contact me by email either through my website or at alongsidecaregiverconsulting@shaw.ca. And thank you for tuning in today, and to Tracy Crump for sharing your caregiving story, your wisdom, and your insights. If you don't want to miss future episodes, be sure to subscribe to Island Treasures podcasts. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a rating and a review. See you next episode.